Hi guys, here's another book I have for you about Texas. This one is called The Tree That Would Not Die, and it's by Ellen Levine, and I have permission to read it from, let's see, Scholastic. Okay, so here we go. The Tree That Would Not Die. All right. One morning, hundreds of years ago, an acorn fell and grew in the earth, and that was me. And I grew. And as I grew, I saw farther and farther across the land. When I was 11 and giving shade, I had a good friend, a buffalo calf, who nibbled grass nearby. When he'd rub against my trunk, Blue Jay, higher up in my branches, complained about the shaking. "He's just using you to scratch an itch." But I knew Calf was also saying hello. When the buffalo ran, their hoofs pounded the earth and kicked up dust for miles around. My branches swayed, my leaves trembled, and my upper roots quivered. Blue Jay coughed and flew off until things quieted down. Okay. And I grew. Soon I was so big, the first people chose me as a meeting place. Comanche, Tejas, Lipan Apache, Tonkawa, they fought many a war among themselves, but when they sat by me, they laid their weapons down. First people gathered my acorns and leaves and made sweet teas from them. "Come home safely from the hunt," said the young women as the young men sipped my tea. They told of past hunting trips, and they sang of the buffalo who kept them warm with thick skin blankets, moccasins for their feet, and robes for their backs. The children climbed my arms and swung in pairs. They chewed my leaf stems now and then, but they never hurt me. Never did they cut me with knives. They knew my bark was like a buffalo skin, protecting me and keeping me healthy. They walked softly on the earth around my roots, for they knew I couldn't live without them. And I grew. One morning, a loud clanging echoed over the hills and woke me earlier than usual. Soldiers with swords that banged against their armor. When their swords were still, I could hear the music of their Spanish words. After a time, more Spaniards came and built churches and settlements. Tejas, they named the land, the first people's word for friendly people. And still I grew. One steamy day, 4 First People sat under my canopy. They waited for a man named Stephen Austin. I myself cannot say if he came, for it was a hot afternoon, and I dozed off. I do know that ever since that day I have been called Treaty Oak, for it is said the First People and Austin made peace beneath my tent. I was made a boundary, I'm told. West of me the First People lived, to the east Austin's people. And I grew. The American settlers came and cleared the land. They cut down many relatives and friends of mine to build their homes and light their fires. I was the treaty oak, so I was spared. The land began to change. Trails became paths, became lanes, became roads. Farmlands were cleared and crops were planted. There was a woman who had 9 children. She was always washing clothes, smoking meats, putting up fruits and vegetables. Once a week she'd visit, sit in my shade a while, and smoke her pipe. And the Tin Man stopped by whenever he passed through. He traded pots and pans, sharpened knives, and scissors. As good as a newspaper was he, told what was happening in every town. And I grew. I was very large when I got word that Sam Houston and his soldiers had defeated the Mexican army. They captured General Santa Anna while Sam Houston lay wounded under a relative of mine. Tejas became a separate country. 5 men rode up one day and rested their horses near me. They were looking for a new place to build Austin, the capital of this new country they called Texas. The first man pointed to the river flowing nearby. The second stretched out in a field of bluebonnets. "The surrounding hills are like soldiers guarding the town," said the third. "Perfect!" cried the fourth, and the fifth agreed. So the government came here to Austin. Government offices were built and rooms were filled with important reports and important letters and important orders. Archives, they were called. And I grew. and the piles of reports and letters and orders grew. The people of Austin were proud of their archives. When the president of Texas tried to move the papers to another city, they shouted, "No!" And they rolled a cannon into the street and fired it. No one was hit, but the president was forced to leave the papers behind. The people of Austin had won the archives war. I grew, but sometimes I didn't like what I saw. The first people and the settlers fought many battles. My boundary line was ignored. The settlers wanted to build new and bigger towns, and so they drove the first people from the land. As I grew, Texas grew too, and became part of the United States. The Lone Star State, we were called, and the capital stayed right here in Austin. Some settlers had brought slaves with them. People owning people, how can that be, I wondered. Then slave owners in Austin drove out the Mexican Americans. Too friendly with slaves, they said, makes the slaves want freedom. One moonlit night, a young black boy and his Mexican American friend hid high up in me. A group of white men searched for them. I told Owl, perched on one of my arms, to be silent. The men rode past, and the boys escaped. Still, I grew, tall enough to watch the cowboys ride and rope amidst a sea of cattle flowing toward Kansas. Then the railroads came, roads paved over the grass, and more trees were cut. I grew, but telephone poles grew too. Houses pressed around me, and buildings grew taller than I. Everybody was busy. The owners on whose land I stood talked of cutting me down to make room for a building. For the first time, I was afraid. Then something changed. People lost their jobs and wandered past at all hours. I had visitors who slept under me every night. The Depression, or the bad times, they called it. Once again, there was talk of selling me or cutting me down. Still I grew, but for how long, I wondered. I think it was the children who saved me. They sent pennies and nickels for the city to buy me, and the city made a park around me. There were picnics and weddings, games and get-togethers, all in my park. I grew bigger, but the land around me grew smaller. Buildings hid the sky. At least I was safe, I thought. Then, late one night, a stranger parked his car across the street. He crept into the park and poured a liquid in a circle by my side. At first, it felt cool, and I shuddered. Later, it burned. I could not grow! I could not grow! My leaves turned brown and fell off. The foresters and scientists were called in. They cleaned the soil around my roots. I was too sick to make food, so they tried to feed me. I lost so many leaves I burned in the sun. They shielded me and sprayed me with a cool mist of water. I, who had shaded so many, could not shade myself. They cut my dead limbs away. I am smaller now. The man was caught and punished, but he would not say why he had poisoned me. Will I grow again? I do not know. I've had many visitors, sometimes 100 a day. I didn't think so many people cared whether I lived or died. They sang to me, danced, prayed, leave presents. Many have brought me flowers. Some have read poems. Thousands have written from around the world. Dear tree, the letters all begin. One boy wrote, please get well. You are too old to die. Will I grow again? I do not know. Wait! I feel new buds pushing off the old leaves. It's spring, and I'm growing. My new leaves are uncurling. I hope they will last. But if they don't, my acorns are planted, and they are my children. The end. So that is the story of Treaty Oak right here in Austin. You can still go see it. It's still alive, but not as big and beautiful as it once was. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this story.